The sun of Allura Prime was larger and redder than the one back on Earth, casting a warm, almost dreamlike glow over the alien market. The air smelled of spices Ethan could not name, and the streets were alive with voices speaking in dozens of strange languages. Stalls made of bright fabrics swayed in the gentle wind, and colorful creatures with scales, fur, or feathers moved between them, selling everything from glowing fruits to weapons made of crystal. Ethan had come here only to buy spare parts for his ship. The last thing he wanted was trouble, but as he walked through the narrow lanes, his eyes kept catching on unfamiliar sights. A merchant pouring silver dust into tiny bottles, a lizard-like boy chasing a balloon that floated higher than the roofs, a group of musicians playing instruments that looked like living plants. Then he saw her. She was standing in front of a small stall, her skin a soft shade of blue with a faint shimmer. Her long white hair moved like silk even in the slightest breeze, and her eyes, a deep silver, locked on him the moment their gazes met. In her hands, she held something glowing faintly, a flower with petals that seemed to shift colors, changing from pink to gold as the light touched them. For a moment, she just stared at him, as if gathering courage. Then she stepped forward, moving with slow, graceful steps. Her clothes were simple, a short dress made of woven strands that looked like light itself, but the way she held herself made her seem almost royal. "Human," she said softly, her voice like music. She lifted the flower toward him with both hands. The petals caught the sunlight and seemed to sparkle. Ethan blinked, surprised. "For me?" he asked, wondering if she mistook him for someone else. She gave a shy smile, a faint blush of violet appearing on her cheeks, and nodded. Her hands trembled slightly as she pushed the flower closer to him. Ethan glanced around, confused. Several nearby aliens had stopped what they were doing to watch. A stall owner froze in mid-motion. A customer dropped a basket of fruit, and a child gasped loudly. Not wanting to be rude, Ethan reached out and took the flower. "Thank you," he said with an awkward smile. The petals were warm in his hand, almost alive. The moment his fingers closed around the stem, the air in the market seemed to change. A wave of quiet whispers moved through the crowd, and some people stepped back as if giving him space. Others stared at him with wide eyes, and a few even bowed slightly. The girl's blush deepened, and she lowered her gaze. Clasping her hands in front of her, she whispered something in her own language, the words quick and breathless. He didn't understand them, but the way she looked at him made his chest tighten slightly. Before Ethan could ask her name, a tall alien with green skin and horns leaned toward another and muttered loudly enough for Ethan to hear. He accepted the proposal. Ethan frowned. "Proposal," he repeated under his breath, but no one answered. The girl gave a small bow and took a step closer. Her eyes met his again, and this time there was no shyness, only a strange intensity. "I am Lyris," she said slowly, as if making sure he understood every word. Then she touched her chest lightly and added, "Yours." "Yours?" Ethan echoed, his confusion growing. But before he could say more, 3 alien children ran past them, giggling and chanting words in a language he didn't know. Each time they passed, they glanced at him and laughed even louder. Lyris turned and spoke sharply to the children. They stopped laughing and ran off, looking embarrassed. When she faced Ethan again, she seemed calmer, though her eyes still held a spark of excitement. "You? Come," she said, gesturing for him to follow. Ethan hesitated, but the crowd's attention was making him uncomfortable. So he followed her down a side street lined with hanging lanterns. The sounds of the busy market faded behind them, replaced by the gentle hum of small glowing insects that floated through the air. She stopped at a doorway draped with colorful beads. The smell of sweet flowers and warm spice drifted out. Lyris motioned for him to step inside. Ethan looked down at the glowing flower still in his hand, wondering what he had just agreed to without realizing it. Something told him that this was more than a simple gift. The way the crowd reacted. The way she looked at him. None of it felt casual. Inside the doorway, soft music played, and the light was dim. Lyris waited for him with a patient, almost hopeful expression. She touched the flower in his hand gently, her fingers brushing his skin. Then she whispered something in her language again. The tone filled with meaning he couldn't understand but could feel. Ethan swallowed. A strange unease settling in his stomach. He had only come to by ship parts. Yet somehow, he had stepped into something far more complicated, and whatever it was, it had just begun. Ethan stepped into the dim room. The beads behind him swaying as they closed off the market noise. The air was warm, filled with a scent he could not place, part sweet, part sharp, and it made his head feel light. Lyris moved ahead of him, her bare feet making no sound on the smooth floor. She turned once to look at him, her silver eyes catching the glow from the lanterns. And then she disappeared through another curtain of beads. Ethan followed, clutching the strange flower. Inside was a small sitting area with low cushions arranged around a round table carved from black stone. The surface shimmered faintly, as if light swam beneath it. Lyris motioned for him to sit. He hesitated, but curiosity won. He sat down, feeling the cushion sink softly under his weight before he could speak. A soft knock came from outside. The beads parted, and two older aliens stepped in, their skin a paler shade of blue than Lyris's. They looked at Ethan, then at the flower in his hand, and their eyes widened slightly. One spoke in their language, the other nodded slowly. Ethan didn't understand a word, but the way they looked at him made his stomach tighten. Lyris spoke to them in quick, flowing tones. They listened, their expressions serious. Then one of them, the older female, smiled warmly at Ethan and touched her forehead in a gesture of respect. Ethan gave a small, uncertain nod in return. When the elders left, Ethan leaned toward Lyris. "What's going on?" I asked. "Why is everyone looking at me like that?" Lyris tilted her head slightly, as if the answer should be obvious. "You took the flower," she said, her voice calm. "That means you accepted me." Ethan blinked. "Accepted you? For what?" She looked surprised, her brows lifting slightly. "To be my chosen," she said softly. "To share my life, to make life." The words sank in slowly, and his pulse quickened. "Wait, make life, you mean?" Her eyes softened, and a faint violet blush colored her cheeks again. She didn't answer directly. Only lowering her gaze, Ethan leaned back, feeling the walls of the small room close in on him. He wanted to say it. Was a misunderstanding, but the warmth in her eyes made the words stick in his throat. From outside, the sound of footsteps and murmuring voices grew louder. Lyris glanced toward the doorway, a flicker of nervousness passing over her face. She stood quickly, motioning for Ethan to remain seated. The beads parted again. And this time, 3 alien men entered. They were tall, dressed in layered fabrics with silver patterns, and each wore a thin metal band across the forehead. They looked important and dangerous. The tallest of them spoke in a deep voice. Switching to accented human language, "You are Ethan, the human who accepted the sacred bloom?" Ethan gave a slow nod. "I didn't know it was sacred." The man's eyes narrowed slightly. "The bloom is given only once in a lifetime by an unbonded one." He looked at Lyris briefly, then back at Ethan. "It is a binding act, not to be undone." Ethan felt a cold weight settle in his chest. He tried to keep his voice steady. "Look, I think there's been a misunderstanding." "I didn't know what it meant." The man's lips curved into something that wasn't quite a smile. "Ignorance does not break the bond," he said. "You will be honored among us, and the union will be celebrated tonight." Ethan opened his mouth to protest, but Lyris stepped forward quickly, placing herself between him and the men. She spoke in her own language, her tone firm but not angry. The men listened, exchanged glances, then left without another word. The moment they were gone, Ethan turned to her. "What did you tell them?" "That you are not ready," she said simply. "But they will not wait long." Ethan ran a hand through his hair. "This is insane." "I was just walking through the market." Lyra studied him, her expression unreadable. Then she sat down across from him, her hands folded neatly in her lap. "You helped me earlier," she said, "when that merchant tried to cheat me. You told him to stop. No one here has done that for me before." Ethan frowned. Trying to remember, he did recall stepping in when some vendor was shouting at her. But he hadn't thought much of it. That was nothing. He said, "To me, it was everything." She replied softly. Her gaze lingered on him. "So I gave you the bloom." Ethan felt trapped between wanting to stand and leave and the strange pull in her voice. Outside, the noises of the market had grown distant, replaced by the steady beat of drums from somewhere deeper in the city. Lyris turned her head slightly. "Toward the sound, they are preparing for us," she said quietly. "For us." Ethan repeated, his throat dry. She nodded, her silver eyes reflecting the faint light of the lanterns. "When the moon rises, they will call your name." Ethan's heart pounded. He had no idea what was coming, only that the more time passed, the harder it would be to escape, and deep down, a small part of him wondered if he even wanted to. Ethan sat on the cushion long after Lyris's words faded. The faint beat of drums outside growing steadier, each thud like a countdown he could not stop. The air in the small room felt heavy, carrying the sweet and sharp scent that made him both calm and restless. Lyris moved quietly, arranging small bowls on the table, each filled with something strange, glowing seeds, petals floating in clear liquid, and a fine blue powder that shimmered like frost. He leaned forward slightly. "Lyris, I need you to explain everything, no half answers." She looked at him for a long moment, as if deciding whether he was ready to hear the truth. Then she nodded slowly. "The bloom I gave you is not a gift," she said. "It is an oath, one that binds our lives together." Ethan's grip on the flower tightened. "But I didn't agree to anything. I didn't know." Her silver eyes softened. "It does not matter if you knew. In our law, the act of taking it means you accept me as your life mate. It is sacred." He stared at her, his chest tightening. "Life mate? Meaning what exactly?" Lyris's gaze did not waver. "Meaning you are now responsible for me, to protect me, to share your life with me, to give life with me." Her voice was calm, but there was something in it that made his heartbeat quicken. Ethan shook his head. "Where I come from, things don't work like this. You can't just hand someone a flower and say they belong to you." A faint smile touched her lips. "Perhaps on your world. But here, the bloom chooses as much as the giver. I carried it for months, waiting, hoping I would find the one worthy." She reached out and brushed her fingertips against the petals in his hand. "And it opened for you." He wanted to argue, but her touch sent an odd shiver through him. Somewhere outside, a horn sounded, followed by a chorus of voices. Lyris glanced toward the door. "The elders will call for us soon." Ethan stood abruptly. "No, I can't do this. I need to leave." He stepped toward the beaded curtain, but before he could push through, two tall figures appeared in the doorway. Their bodies were painted with swirling white patterns, and they carried long spears tipped with crystal. One spoke in a deep, resonant tone. "The union feast is prepared. The binding must begin before the moon reaches its peak." Lyris rose gracefully, bowing her head in acknowledgement. Ethan opened his mouth to protest, but the taller guard stepped aside slightly, motioning for them to follow. It wasn't exactly a threat, but it was clear he wouldn't be allowed to simply walk away. As they stepped into the street, Ethan felt the weight of dozens of eyes on him. The market had transformed. Stalls had been pushed back, and long tables covered in colorful Prusse cloth lined the square. Lanterns hung from ropes strung overhead, casting soft, shifting light. Music played a low, rhythmic sound made by drums and flutes carved from bone. People moved aside as they passed, some bowing to Lyris, others touching their foreheads as they looked at Ethan. The respect was unnerving. He had been treated as an outsider since arriving on Valora Prime, but now they were looking at him like he was something rare. Almost untouchable, they reached the largest table at the far end of the square, where 3 alien elders sat. Their skin was marked with silver paint, and each wore an elaborate collar made of woven metal and stone. The one in the center, an old man with sharp, bright eyes, leaned forward. "Human, Ethan," he said in careful English, "you have been chosen, and you have accepted. This is a great honor, one no outsider has been given in living memory." Ethan glanced at Lyris, but she kept her eyes on the elder. "With the Union," the old man continued, "you will join our bloodline. You will protect it, strengthen it, and carry it forward." The words felt heavy, as if they were pressing down on Ethan's shoulders. "And if I refuse?" he asked quietly. The elder's expression didn't change, but his voice cooled slightly. "To refuse is to shame the one who offered the bloom, and to insult her family. Such an insult is answered with challenge, sometimes with blood." Ethan's stomach tightened. This wasn't just some misunderstanding he could laugh off and walk away from. It was a web he had already stepped into, and every move would pull him deeper. The elder gestured toward the center of the square. "Stand together," he said. Lyris stepped forward and turned to face Ethan. Her silver eyes met his, and there was no fear in them, only quiet certainty. She held out her hand, palm up. Ethan hesitated, his mind racing. If he refused, here, in front of everyone, he could cause trouble he wasn't ready for. If he agreed, even just for the moment, he might find a way to untangle himself later. Slowly, he reached out and placed his hand in hers. Her skin was warm, softer than he expected. The crowd erupted. In a sound somewhere between a cheer and a chant, drums pounded louder, and the square filled with movement as dancers spun in circles. Throwing petals into the air, the scent of flowers and spice wrapped around him again, and the night sky above seemed to darken as the red sun dipped lower. Ethan didn't know what would happen next, only that the moment he touched her hand, something in Lyris's expression changed. She looked at him not as a stranger, but as if he was already hers, and deep inside, a voice he didn't want to hear whispered that maybe he didn't mind. The drums grew louder, each beat vibrating through the ground beneath Ethan's feet. Lyris's hand stayed in his, her fingers warm and firm, guiding him forward into the heart of the celebration. The crowd parted for them, faces lit by the glow of hundreds of hanging lanterns, petals falling from above like slow-moving rain. Every step felt heavier, not because of the path, but because Ethan knew each one was carrying him deeper into something he didn't understand. They stopped in front of a raised stone platform where a long, low fire burned, throwing orange light against the darkening sky. On either side of the fire, young aliens danced in perfect rhythm, their movements slow and deliberate. Carrying bowls of glowing water, the music around them softened. The voices of the crowd fading to a hush, an elder stepped forward, his eyes reflecting the firelight. In his hands he held a small carved box made of bone and silver. He spoke in his language first, his voice carrying across the square. The words flowed like a chant, calm but full of weight. Then he switched to halting English. "This night, 2 lives join as one. Their paths, once apart, now walk together. Their blood, once separate, now flows toward the same future." Ethan shifted uncomfortably, feeling the eyes of the entire square on him. He wanted to say this was wrong, that they had it all mixed up. But the moment he glanced at Lyris, her gaze caught him. There was no pleading in her eyes, only a quiet, unshakable belief that this was meant to happen. The elder opened the box and took out a thin chain made of tiny, interlocked metal leaves. It shimmered faintly in the firelight. He placed it gently in Lyris's hands, then motioned for her to put it around Ethan's neck. She stepped closer, her scent soft and unfamiliar, and slipped the chain over his head. Her fingers brushed the back of his neck, sending a small shiver down his spine. When the chain settled against his skin, the crowd let out a soft, collective breath. It was almost like a sigh of approval. The elder spoke again, faster this time, and the music began to rise once more. Lyris turned to him and took both of his hands, holding them tightly. "You will stay tonight," she said quietly, so only he could hear. It wasn't a question. It was spoken like a truth already decided. Ethan opened his mouth to respond, but the sound of sharp laughter from the edge of the crowd cut through the music. A tall figure pushed forward, parting the onlookers with a single sweep of his arm. His skin was a darker shade of blue than Lyris's, and his body was wrapped in a dark, leather-like armor. His eyes were fixed on Ethan with something between anger and challenge. "Who is this outsider?" the man demanded in their language. The elder tried to speak, but the man stepped closer, his hand resting on the hilt of a curved blade at his waist. Lyris's fingers tightened on Ethan's hands. Her body tensing, she spoke quickly, her voice sharp, but the man only laughed again. His gaze moved from her to Ethan, and he said something short and biting. The words were foreign, but the tone was clear. It was a challenge. The elder raised his hands, trying to calm the situation, but the man stepped onto the platform, drawing the curved blade with a hiss. The crowd murmured, some stepping back, others leaning forward with anticipation. Lyris turned to Ethan, her silver eyes wide. "He is claiming right of contest," she whispered. "If he wins, the bloom passes to him." Ethan's pulse quickened. "And if I win?" Her voice dropped lower. "Then there will be no more challengers. You will be mine before the moon's rise." Ethan's first instinct was to back away, but the crowd's gaze was like a wall behind him. There was no leaving without becoming the enemy of everyone here, including Lyris, and, despite everything, the thought of seeing her look at someone else the way she looked at him made his chest tighten in a way he didn't want to examine. The man stepped closer, swinging the blade in a slow arc. Testing its weight, Ethan had no weapon, no armor. Only the chain around his neck and the strength in his hands. He swallowed hard, his mind racing. This wasn't a fight he had chosen, but now it was his only way out. The elder spoke a single word, and the drums stopped. The silence that followed was deep, heavy. The challenger lunged without warning, the blade slicing toward Ethan in a bright curve. Ethan dropped low, the metal singing above his head, and moved to the side, his body reacting before his mind could catch up. The crowd let out a hiss of surprise. The man turned quickly, attacking again. This time, Ethan stepped forward, grabbing the man's wrist and twisting hard. The blade wavered, but the challenger was strong. Stronger than Ethan expected, they struggled in the firelight, their shadows twisting across the stone. Lyris stood frozen at the edge of the platform, her hands clenched, her eyes never leaving Ethan. The challenger snarled something and shoved hard, sending Ethan stumbling back toward the fire. Heat burned against his skin, but he caught himself just before falling in. With a sharp breath, he grabbed a handful of sand from the ground and flung it into the man's face. The challenger staggered, blinking rapidly, and Ethan took his chance, stepping in and driving his shoulder hard into the man's chest. The impact sent the man stumbling backward, his blade clattering against the stone. The crowd erupted into shouts, some in surprise, others in approval. Breathing hard, Ethan stepped back, his eyes locked on the fallen weapon. The challenger looked Up at him, rage in his eyes, but he did not move to attack again. The elder raised his voice above the noise, declaring something that made the crowd cheer even louder. Lyris stepped forward, her hands trembling slightly. She reached up and touched Ethan's cheek, her voice barely above a whisper. "Now, no one can take you from me." Ethan looked at her, still catching his breath. And for the first time since this began, he wondered if maybe it wasn't just the flower that had chosen, but something else entirely, something he couldn't yet name. The cheering still echoed in Ethan's ears as the crowd slowly began to disperse. The heat from the fire was fading, replaced by the cooler air of the evening. Lyris did not let go of his hand, her grip firm and certain as she led him. Away from the platform, the chain around his neck felt heavier now, not because of the metal, but because of what it meant. Every step through the market was met with approving nods, soft smiles, and whispered words he could not understand. They passed under an archway made of twisted branches strewn with glowing crystals. Beyond it lay a quieter path, lit only by small lanterns placed in the ground. The air here was thick with the scent of flowers, and the faint sound of drums still reached them, but softer now, more like a heartbeat. Lyris said nothing as she guided him forward, her pace slow, her posture calm, but he could feel the tension beneath her movements. The path opened into a wide clearing where a single large tent stood. Its fabric shimmered with shifting colors, changing with every flicker of the lantern light. Guards stood at either side of the entrance, but when they saw Lyris, they bowed and stepped aside without a word. She pushed the flap aside and motioned for him to enter. Inside, the air was warmer, scented with burning herbs. The floor was covered in thick woven rugs, and in the center was a low platform surrounded by bowls of water that reflected the light like liquid glass. Ethan hesitated at the entrance. Feeling the weight of the space, it was quiet here, too quiet. As if the world outside no longer existed, Lyris walked to the center and turned to face him. Her silver eyes searched his face for a long moment before she spoke. "The contest is over. No one can challenge you now. The bloom is yours." Ethan stepped inside slowly. "You keep saying it's mine, but I never asked for it." She tilted her head slightly. "The bloom is not only a gift, it is a choice. I made it, and you accepted it." He rubbed the back of his neck. "I didn't know what it meant, Lyris, on my world. You don't bind someone to you because they took a flower." Her expression didn't change, but her voice softened. "On my world, the bloom is a piece of the heart, given only once. If it is refused, the one who offered may never give it again. If it is accepted, it is forever." Ethan stared at her, trying to find the right words, but the silence between them stretched. Heavy with unspoken things, she stepped closer, her movements slow and deliberate. Her gaze never left his, and her voice dropped to almost a whisper. "Do you regret taking it?" He opened his mouth, then closed it again. He wanted to say yes, to protect himself, to keep distance. But the way she looked at him made the words stick in his throat. Instead, he said quietly, "I don't know." Something in her eyes softened. Further, she reached out and took the flower from his hand, holding it gently between her palms. Then she knelt by the platform. Setting it down on the surface, the petals glowed faintly. Casting ripples of light over the bowls of water, she gestured for him to join her. Ethan moved to her side, unsure of what would happen next. She touched the edge of the platform, her fingers tracing the carved lines that ran along it. "This is the heartstone," she said. "It seals the bond when the bloom touches it with both hands." He hesitated. "And if we don't?" Her eyes lingered on his face. "The bond remains unfinished. The people will see it as unsteady, and some will wait for a chance to break it before he could respond." The tent flap moved, and one of the elders entered. His gaze swept the room. Resting briefly on Ethan before settling on the flower, he spoke in their language. His tone low but firm, Lyris nodded slowly, answering in short, careful words. The elder's eyes narrowed, but after a moment, he turned and left without another sound. When they were alone again, Lyris looked at Ethan. They will not wait much longer. Ethan exhaled slowly, his mind racing. He was far from home, deep in a culture he barely understood, and surrounded by people who expected him to fulfill a role he had never agreed to. But as he looked at Lyris, the steady calm in her eyes, the quiet strength in her voice, he realized that walking away might not be as simple as he kept telling himself. She placed her hand on the hearthstone again. Waiting, Ethan stared at her hand, at the glow of the bloom, at the way the lights seemed to wrap around her. Outside, the faint beat of the drums grew slower, deeper, as if matching his heartbeat. He didn't move, not yet, but he knew that sooner or later, he would have to choose. For now, he simply stood there. The warmth of the tent surrounding him, the scent of flowers thick in the air, and the knowledge that the next moment could change. His life forever pressing down on him like the weight of the red moon rising outside. The silence in the tent stretched until it felt like the walls themselves were leaning closer. Ethan could hear his own heartbeat over the faint hum of the lanterns. Lyris still had her hand on the hearthstone, the glow from the bloom lighting her fingers in shades of gold and rose. She looked at him without speaking, as if the entire decision rested in the space between his next breath and hers. Outside, voices began to rise, not in celebration, but in murmurs. The flap of the tent shifted slightly, as if someone had brushed past it. Ethan felt the prickle of unseen eyes watching. He took a slow step toward the platform, drawn more by instinct than decision, but before he could place his hand beside hers, the sound of boots on stone came from outside, sharp and fast. The tent flap was thrown open, and two armed aliens stepped in, their armor marked with symbols Ethan hadn't seen before. One of them spoke in a low, cold voice to Lyris. She straightened slowly, her expression changing from calm to guarded. The man's gaze turned to Ethan, lingering for a moment as if measuring him. Then he said something that made Lyris's lips tighten. "They say the bond is being questioned," she told Ethan quietly. "Some claim the contest was unfair, that you had help." Ethan almost laughed in disbelief. "Help? I nearly got thrown into a fire." Her voice dropped lower. "This is how they challenge without fighting you directly. If enough doubt is sown before the bloom touches the hearthstone, the elders can call for the binding to be broken." One of the armed men stepped forward, pointing toward Ethan and then toward the door. Lyris's hand shot out, stopping him. She spoke quickly, her voice sharp. But the man's expression didn't soften. The second guard moved to the side of the tent, as if blocking any chance of slipping away. Ethan looked at Lyris. "So what happens if they succeed?" Her silver eyes darkened. "Then the bloom is taken from you and given to someone else." The words hit harder than he expected. He had told himself again and again that this wasn't his choice, that he didn't belong here, but the thought of her standing next to someone else made something twist uncomfortably in his chest. The first guard gestured again, more forcefully this time. Lyris ignored him, turning fully to Ethan. "If you want to end this now, you can walk out. They will take the bloom, and it will be over," she said, her voice calm, but there was something beneath it, a flicker of hurt she couldn't hide completely. Ethan stared at her for a moment. The easy answer was to leave, to step past the guards and walk into the night. He could find his way back to his ship, leave Valora Prime behind. Forget the smell of flowers and the sound of drums. Forget the way she looked at him as if she already knew every part of him. But even as he thought it, he knew he wouldn't forget. Not truly. The glow from the bloom seemed brighter now, as if it was waiting for him. Lyris's hand still rested on the hearthstone, steady and patient. Her other hand was open toward him, a silent offer. The guards shifted impatiently, one of them muttering something under his breath. Ethan took a step forward, then another. His mind told him to turn back, but his feet carried him until he stood beside her. The warmth from her body was close enough to feel, the faint tremor in her breath reaching him like a secret without breaking her gaze. He reached down and placed his hand over hers on the hearthstone. The instant his skin touched the carved surface, a low hum filled the tent. The water in the surrounding bowls shimmered, and the bloom's petals opened wider, releasing a soft burst of golden light. The glow spread across their joined hands. Curling up their arms like threads of fire, the guards froze, their expressions shifting from challenge to reluctant acceptance. Lyris didn't look at them. Her eyes stayed on Ethan's, and there was something in them now, relief, pride, and something deeper that made his chest tighten. The light faded slowly, sinking into the stone and leaving only the quiet scent of flowers in the air. The hum died away, replaced by the faint sound of drums outside. Slower now, like a heartbeat at rest, Lyris let out a breath she had been holding, her fingers tightening slightly around his. "It is done," she said softly. "No one can take this from us now." Ethan didn't answer right away. His mind was still trying to catch up with what had just happened, but there was a strange calm in his chest, as if some part of him had been fighting the decision for so long that the moment it was made, the weight lifted. The guards backed away, one of them muttering something that sounded almost respectful. They left the tent without another word, the flap swaying shut behind them. Outside, the crowd had begun to cheer again, this time louder, freer. The sound rolled over the tent like a wave. Lyris stepped closer, the chain of metal leaves on his neck brushing her arm. She looked up at him, the faint violet blush returning to her cheeks. "You chose," she said simply, as if that was all that mattered. Ethan met her gaze, and for the first time since she had given him the bloom, he didn't feel like correcting her. He wasn't sure what tomorrow would bring, but for tonight, the choice was his and hers and no one else's. The night air was warm as Ethan and Lyris stepped out of the tent. The square beyond had transformed again, this time into something almost magical. Lanterns floated in the air, drifting slowly like glowing seeds caught in an invisible current. Music filled the space, softer than before, carrying a rhythm that seemed to settle into the bones rather than demand movement. The crowd opened a path for them, and people reached out to touch the back of Ethan's hand or brush their fingers against Lyris's arm, murmuring words he didn't understand but felt were blessings. They walked together through the center of it all, Ethan still half expecting someone to stop them, to say there had been a mistake. But no one did. Every face they passed was alight with approval, even pride. The chain around his neck felt less like a collar and more like a mark of belonging at the far end of the square. A small raised platform waited, covered in thick woven cloth and decorated with more of the glowing flowers. Lyris guided him up the steps, pausing at the top to look out over the gathered people. Her hand in his felt steady, but when she spoke, it was only to him. "From this night, you are part of us. You will be remembered in our stories." He let out a quiet breath. "That's a lot to take in." She smiled faintly. "You will have time. We have a lifetime now." The elder who had spoken to him before stepped forward from the crowd, raising both hands to call for silence. His voice carried easily, even without shouting. He spoke in their language for a while, the crowd answering with soft sounds at the right moments. Then he turned to Ethan and switched to English. "You came to us as a stranger. You fought with courage. You accepted with honor. Now you are bound, and your path is ours." Ethan didn't know what to say, so he simply nodded. The elder smiled, then stepped back, and the music swelled again. This time, people began to dance in slow circles, weaving between each other with practiced grace. Some carried trays of food and drink. Others tossed handfuls of petals into the air. The sweet scent of them mixed with the spice of the cooked meat drifting from a nearby fire. Lyris led him down from the platform and into the circle. The dancers shifted to make space for them, and without warning, she placed his hand on her waist and her other hand on his shoulder. "Follow my steps," she murmured. He tried. Though he was sure he looked clumsy compared to the fluid movements of everyone else, she only laughed softly and guided him, her smile breaking through the formality of the night. For a while, Ethan forgot about the fight, the guards, and the pressure of the last hours. The music, the glow of the lanterns, and the warmth of her hand pulled him into the moment. But when the dance slowed and they moved away from the circle, he caught sight of a figure standing at the edge of the crowd. Watching them, it was the challenger from before. His expression unreadable. Ethan tensed, but the man didn't move forward. He simply inclined his head slightly, almost in acknowledgement, then turned and disappeared into the shadows between the stalls. Ethan wasn't sure if that was a truce or a warning. The rest of the celebration passed in a blur of voices, tastes, and colors at last. When the crowd began to thin and the music softened to a gentle hum, Lyris took his hand again, leading him away from the square. The path wound between the dark shapes of sleeping houses, lanterns swaying above them in the warm breeze. They reached a small dwelling set apart from the others. Its walls were built from pale stone, and its roof was covered with the same glowing flowers that had begun everything. Lyris pushed open the door and stepped inside, waiting for him to follow. The interior was simple, low cushions, shelves carved into the walls, and a single window that looked out over the quiet market street. She closed the door and turned to him, her expression softer now, the formal mask gone. "This is our home," she said. Ethan let the words sink. "In our home," he repeated slowly. She stepped closer, the glow from the window outlining the curve of her cheek and the silver of her eyes. "You could have left," she said quietly, "but you stayed." He thought of the moment in the tent, of the weight of the choice, and how much easier it would have been to walk away. "I don't think I could have walked away," he admitted. Her hand rose to touch the chain around his neck, fingers brushing lightly over the metal leaves. "Then this will never be broken," she said. For a long moment, they stood there in the quiet, the air between them warm outside. The last of the lanterns drifted away into the night sky, vanishing. Like small stars, somewhere in the distance, the drums beat one final time, slow and deep. Ethan knew he was still far from understanding everything about this place, about her, about what this bond truly meant. But as she took his hand and led him to sit beside her, he realized something had shifted. He wasn't just a visitor anymore. He was part of something, a people, a tradition, a life he had not planned for, but now belonged to. And as the night closed around them, with the scent of flowers heavy in the air and her head resting lightly against his shoulder, he thought maybe, just maybe, the bloom had chosen right after all.